Yes. Howdy, folks.
Hello.
It's been 2 weeks, and it's a good thing it's been 2 weeks, because the last show was intense. I mean,
Yeah.
the subject was intense. Just to recap, so at that point, the US had done its airstrikes on the 3 nuclear sites in Iran, but it hadn't ended yet. It was the following Tuesday, 24th, that Trump put an abrupt halt on it, which was crazy in itself, how that ended so suddenly. I kind of have like a PTSD from the whole thing. It's like, because it looks so hot, like, this is it. It's Armageddon. But again, no, there's a kind of a stagey, the way it went down with Iran's counterstrike on the bases, or two bases, at US troops stationed across the Gulf. Trump then turns up in Europe for a NATO summit, and he point blank says to the press, yeah, I got a call from Iran, and they said, what time we're going to do it, and you remember that statement. So that part was definitely like a managed end. Oh, and then immediately Vance was on Fox News that morning, ASAP, in the US, saying, yeah, the 12-day war, giving it the name, and it's over. Whew, it was a hell of a roller coaster, though. But obviously the underlying issues, and this is not over, the underlying issues are still there. And highlighting that, I think, is the fact that Netanyahu is, breaking news today, he's on his way to DC tomorrow to meet Trump again. I think it's the 4th time this year.
It says third since the inauguration.
Okay.
I think.
That's still a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. Trump pretty much immediately, the Washington Post and then CNN, while he was in the air, having just told the press that Iran and Israel don't know what the bleep they're doing, and tweeting on Truth Social that he had called Netanyahu and told him to send those planes back home right now, like an order. He arrives in the Netherlands, and he's fending off charges that, far from his claim that Iran's nuke sites had been obliterated, they hadn't done much damage at all. Probably the most likely scenario. But still, it's interesting to see that they really wanted to maintain a hold on the obliteration narrative, as if Trump wants to put this to bed, right?
Yeah,
that's where he's coming from. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But it ain't over. The Washington Post, in its report, had claimed it was satellite images showing a massive convoy of trucks at Fordo in the days before the strike, suggesting unusual activity and presumably removing enriched uranium, stuff like that. So it's funny that Trump makes this massive statement, obliterate, it's over, we did it, 30-year wish list, check it off the bucket list, Iran's nuclear program is done. But the press and the establishment, the system, is not fooled by that at all, and is immediately on his case about it. Because, well, this is it. They wanted a proper war, a proper regime change. Because you have to think back to 10 days before that, when Netanyahu was super excited, even as missiles were flying into Tel Aviv. He changed the goal to regime change explicitly. Netanyahu didn't just say that for propaganda purposes, right? That does sound like their ideal target. It reminded me of the opening acts in Russia's SMO, They since walked back some of the statements, but the Kremlin was like, what the hell? The French finance minister was saying our goal is to get rid of Putin, collapse the Russian economy and get rid of Putin. Regime change. So that's like the height. Maybe it's. Well, this is the question. Was it wishful thinking on Israel's part, or did Trump effectively stop something that could have been much bigger? How much credit do we give him here? Because at the time we were all like, Trump, dude, what are you doing? You know, all of MAGA's in uproar. Well, dude, another Middle East war. But now with a bit of hindsight.
It's kind of complicated because you can give him credit if you presume that, well, I suppose you don't have to presume. It's pretty much a certainty that an attack on Iran was coming. You know, has been coming for quite a long time. Israel's just been waiting for the right time, because Israel's been talking about doing away with Iran for not just Israel but all the Americans as well. You know, John McCain, bomb Iran. They've wanted to bomb Iran for I don't know how long. It's like
decades.
It's a generational thing at this point. You know, my old grandpappy wanted to bomb Iran, and his
the Beach Boys actually wrote that song for this moment.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you know. So it's been Iran has had to go, which people should think about. You know. Given that, you know, why Iran? Surely, you know, what has changed? Surely, because Netanyahu's been talking about getting rid of Iran, complaining about Iran for 30 years. So why is Iran such a problem, or why are they so fixated on Iran? Why is Israel being fixated on? Well, there's answers to that, obviously, but there's the obvious answers, and then there's more complicated answers. Anyway, Trump, the idea of bombing Iran has been around for a very long time. Israel has wanted to do it. It's obviously an Israeli thing, although it's not as clear an Israeli thing as it being just an Israeli thing. And this is something I think we were saying last time, or one of the recent shows. You two seem to be coming from the perspective of the kind of MAGA perspective. You know, you had snorted a load of MAGA juice. And
it was good though.
Loved the old MAGA juice, and then it was this is Israel alone trying to prevent or trying to force America into, you know,
doing its dirty work
in the Middle East or whatever, or that America, you know, this was Israel's a bad guy here, you know, and but then you can't really. That's not really a reasonable explanation or a solid. Kind of argument, because you can say that it's only Israel, but obviously when you saw the attack in Iran, Trump was fully behind it.
Yeah.
But then you can give him some credit. Obviously he's been supplying the weapons and all that kind of stuff for Israel, and all sorts of air support, etc., and then eventually dropped the bunker buster bombs. So you could say that Trump give him some credit because it didn't go as far as it could have gone. Let's say that he called an end to it quite quickly. He said we had this beautiful,
very abruptly,
huge, the biggest obliterating of a nuclear site that in the history of obliteration of things.
Yeah.
And that was it, and it was all done. But that still doesn't answer the question of why he didn't add it all in the first place. You know. So at the very least, you're going to have to say that if you want to stick with your MAGA cope, is that Trump's under duress, basically. He at the very least has to pander to the Israeli desire to attack Iran. He has to actually go through the process of doing what Israel wants, and the most he can do is, you know, do it all in a very loud and, you know, jingoistic kind of way, and, you know, take control of the whole situation. Say, this is what we're doing. We've done it. It's been huge. It's been awesome. They got smacked. It's all over. It's all done. Let's move on. There you give him some credit, maybe because he's trying to just limit the destructiveness of, obviously, the kind of a war in the Middle East has the potential to be quite destructive, quite chaotic for the whole world. Trump doesn't want that, so he had to limit it. But why did he do it at all? So there, you're either on that Israel has some kind of compromise on him, or some kind of influence, some kind of sphere leverage over him, that he has no choice but to roll over in the face of,
and just manage as best he can.
Right. Or Trump
actively.
Well, he realized that this was a good idea in a certain sense, that he got the advice from everybody and anybody, including the Israelis, and he decided this was a good idea, but that it had to be limited because you don't want it spiraling out into some kind of major Middle Eastern conflict that would then upset global economies and be bad for America and bad for everybody.
Yeah. You had Pakistan immediately saying they'll support Iran if this goes further.
Well, saying that, and then retracting that, and Pakistanis are nuts. You don't know what they're talking about. Anyway, so yeah, you have to pick it out of that.
It's either one or the other,
or one of the three.
One of the three.
I thought it was telling that,
or all of them.
In the peak uncertainty of this, I don't know, maybe he was he was in Canada at the G7. Trump was there too. But the German chancellor was giving an interview to a German journalist, and she suggested to him that Israel was doing by attacking Iran. At this point, the US maybe had not yet done its part. She suggested to him that Israel is doing our dirty work. And I thought he'd brushed that away. Well, that's not very diplomatic. He went, "Oh, Frau so-and-so, I'm really glad you used that term, because that is precisely what Israel is doing. Israel is doing our dirty work." And he's not an American subject to the Israeli lobby at least not to the same extent. He's European. Head of Germany.
But that's not as really dirt. That's not as really lobby phrase. That's just recognizing the fact that that Israel is. That's another way to say that, and probably the way he meant it, in a sense. Was that that's Israel doing what Ukraine is doing for us, and
I think he even tied the two. Yeah,
well, of course, but it's obvious. I mean, but that's the narrative. That's the narrative that's been there all along. That Ukraine is fighting is fighting for us. And Ukraine, Zelensky has repeatedly ad nauseum said the same thing, that we're fighting for all of Europe type thing. So the Israelis would say, and have said it repeatedly, it's like a standard propaganda 101 that we've been subjected to for decades, basically, at least from Israel, and then more recently in the past number of years from Ukraine, that these are two countries that are fighting the West, enemies for the West, and they are therefore due a lot of respect. So it's not surprising that he would have agreed with that. Maybe a German English, maybe he didn't understand the term dirty work. But
it was in German with English subs. The interview was in German.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So exactly. So
I think he explicitly linked Ukraine, and
so it wasn't using the term dirty work, because
his global view then was these are two beachheads against the rest of the world. It was very much a unified West. So right there you have, it's not just a pressure of the Israel lobby, it's like the Western deep state consortium lobby. The whole structure, the whole edifice is compelling you to do that, to act. Now, the plain fact, just reasoning what he said, why they were doing our dirty work was because Iran was a terrorist state, blah, blah, blah. But that's not really what...
Well, that's what he meant.
Yeah, so when he says that Israel is doing the West's dirty work in that sense, yeah, there's nothing wrong with that, because they're fighting the evil terrorists over there, so we don't have to fight them over here. And that doesn't have the negative connotation that...
It's what they've been saying for 40 years.
Yeah. So that doesn't mean... So when he says dirty work, he's talking about we're not having to fight them here on our soil, whereas what you're talking about when it's dirty work, you're talking about, yes, they're doing our regime changing for us in the maniacal sense of the term.
Well, that's the reason I brought up the fact that it wasn't in English, it was in German. It was translated into English as dirty work. What the term was in French, you don't know, and does it have the same... The term dirty work has kind of connotations to it that you're reading into it, but I don't think we're there. It's simply, if you just think about it, he's basically saying, yes, Israel is fighting
for our freedoms,
the hordes of radical Islam in the Middle East, and that's what Israel has been doing for forever, right? And yes, and Ukraine is doing the same. That's what Zelensky has been saying almost every week for the past 4 years or 3 years, and that's what the West has been saying over and over again. Zelensky and the Ukrainians are bravely fighting the evil Russians so that we don't have to fight them here. That's called dirty work. But the interesting thing about Trump is, maybe we kind of digress a bit, but the interesting thing about Trump fighting, just to follow on from what I was saying about Trump, my question about the pick it out of that. So what is it? Did you pick one?
I couldn't remember the options.
The options were that Trump is, well, two kind of go together. Obviously, you can snort as much MAGA cope as you want, but Trump still went ahead and bombed Iran for Israel. Right, that's the MAGA narrative. That's the purist, the MAGA purist narrative is that we should not be involved. This is not what we voted for. We should not be involved in any foreign wars. And Trump went ahead and got involved in a kind of foreign war.
Because of Israel.
So it's those dirty Israelis. So, but why is he helping Israel? Why is he doing that then? Why isn't he doing purist MAGA and saying, screw Israel? I'm not getting involved in Israel's wars. They can fight them themselves.
Well, the pure MAGA copium of that one is that the Israeli lobby, AIPAC, et cetera, has American politicians by
the cojones.
By the cojones.
Well, that's almost public knowledge at this point. Like that is the case. Obviously, I mean, nobody necessarily comes out and admits it, but it's so patently obvious that is the case. But nobody has really ever. There's only the main speculation as to how that is, or why that is, or how that's the case, is that there must be some kind of compromising information, either compromising information on a large number of members of Congress and Senate, pretty much all of them, all but one maybe, all but two, pretty much 98% of the Congress and Senate, all are, have their heads up. They're basically Christian Zionists, right? Diehard Christian Zionists, and they're super supportive of Israel. Now, how many of them are fundy Christians who support Israel because it's Judeo-Christianity?
Not very many.
Not many, right. There's some, but not many.
Yeah.
So I'd say a good majority of them are not of that persuasion, and they just support Israel because Israel's our greatest ally and we need to support Israel. That's usually all you ever get.
Yeah. It just seems like...
Even if supporting Israel means doing things that are not in America's interest, at least
on the face of it.
Well, at least on Trump's kind of "Make America Great Again" narrative, that they're officially not in America's interest.
Yeah.
But all these people seem to think they are. The non-religious Christian Zionist types, the pragmatic political types, they obviously believe that supporting Israel is in America's interest. And so there's this glaring, and has been around for quite a while, even since Trump's first term, there's this glaring disconnect between those two that no one ever answers.
Yeah.
No one ever answers very clearly. I haven't heard anybody, to be honest, answer it actually very clearly. This glaring disconnect between Trump's purist MAGA, America First policy that would involve America not getting involved in other wars, especially for other countries, and the fact that they continue to support Israel in its wars in the Middle East, and the fact that the vast majority of Congress, vast majority of American politicians, the vast majority of the American media all support Israel. Israel's our ally, and we should continue to support them forever, basically. And no one ever explains why. Isn't it strange that that's something that's so in your face almost 24/7? Depends, it comes and goes depending on what's going on in the world. But it's something that's so in your face that America must always support Israel, and it's really in your face. Yeah, it's really in your face right now, because of when conflict arises involving Israel. But it's always there because of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And it was just a matter of course that Israel's our biggest and bestest ally, and we should always support it. That's the end of the story. Trump comes in and says, "Make America great again. Put America first," and that brings up the question of, well, does supporting Israel in this way, as we have done for so long, does that jive with, or does it work with the idea of make America first? And there's people who say, well, not in the sense of it doesn't. If it means that we end up having to commit troops, or we could get involved in Middle Eastern wars like we did in Iraq, etc., for Israel, then it's not in America's interest. But that's what the MAGA people say. MAGA supporters, Trump voters say. But none of the politicians, including Trump, say that. So, and none of them give an explanation. Not Trump, not anybody give an explanation as to why. It's kind of like has become a central issue, of support for Israel, America's support for Israel, possibly get involved in Middle Eastern quagmire wars, or funding wars, the cost and all that kind of stuff, the massive American debt and the cost of getting involved in more wars. That's crazy. We shouldn't do that. Trump campaigned on not doing that. So any hint of him doing that or going in that direction is like, what are you doing? He's like, well, I'm supporting Israel. And it's like, but yeah, supporting Israel, whatever, but not to the point of getting involved in a war for Israel that would, increase the American debt, increase American involvement in foreign wars that have been really bad for it in the past. So why are you doing that? Yeah. But pretty simple, right? It's pretty simple. 1 + 1 = 2 here. Can I have an answer to that question, please? No, you can't have an answer to that question ever. And no one will ever give you an answer to that question. Yeah. And no one seems to ask it. Nobody on Twitter, nobody on social media seems to really answer the question.
Tucker Carlson's been trying to ask, so he asked.
He can't do it either. Something wrong with him.
He seemed to ask it explicitly of Jeffrey Sachs. Jeffrey Sachs gave him, well, Tucker, it's about the Israel lobby. Yeah. And they basically control our politics in Washington. That's more or less legit. He gave the...
That was it?
Jeffrey Sachs of the left actually ended up giving the new MAGA explanation for it. And I'm like, that's not it. That's not all of it. It can't be.
But even on that answer, that's not a proper answer. If Jeffrey Sachs says, well, Turkey, you see, it's the Israel lobby and the influence of the Israel lobby, which is well known. There's been really good, very good books written on it. Walton Mearsheimer wrote a book on it 10 years ago that went into all the details, exposed the extent and the strength of the Israel lobby in the US government and what they were able to achieve, have been able to achieve. But... So I suppose that you're left to assume that the answer is, the Israel lobby, i.e. they're just paying politicians. They just pay more money to politicians. That's it. Is that what it is? Money? No. Just paying money. But that's what you're left. Because obviously just saying it's the Israel lobby isn't an answer. What do you mean it's the Israel lobby?
But it's also, not only has that kind of taken hold within the MAGA movement, but also because it's the noticing. You're noticing things. And one of the noticing things is the fact that, well, a lot of the people who are doing these things happen to have very cozy relationships with the Israelis. But then the other thing that you notice when you start noticing is the connections that said people would have to an Epstein-related network. And so the idea then is, well, the reason why they're doing it is because...
They're being blackmailed, essentially.
But
so that's the extent of the unspoken part of the Israel lobby answer is it's the extent of the Israel lobby and how the Israel lobby actually achieves its influence over politicians, and it's not American politicians, and it's not just money. It has to be more than money.
Yeah. And that's not to say any of this isn't true. I mean, it's very well known that if you can get dirt on someone in order to use it for leverage, you will. Or at least on the state level, right? Or the intelligence level. So, yes, they do have the more traditional ways of lobbying. It's we will donate $1 million to your campaign if you keep our interests in mind, etc. All of those things are true, but it still doesn't quite explain.
Part of the reason is it's it's too heavily dependent on using agency to explain what are massive structural world forces, massive quantities of money, energy, trade flows, trade imbalances. It's structuralism versus agency. Basically, people who rely too much on agency to explain something end up being conspiracy theorists, where this group of individuals here pulled all these strings through all these organizations and thereby manipulated an entire global outcome. That's dependence on agency. Then there's structuralism, which says, well, no, there's market forces, there's resources, there's the GDP size of the country. It relies on the clout, the hard facts on the ground. And there you can get too materialist as well and completely discount the acts of specific groups or simply the leadership of a country. The great men theory of history.
Yeah, exactly.
As someone like Donald Trump is but apportioning how much, therefore, his near abroad. One wishes. In reality, he can't. He tries to exert influence, and he has some success in some areas. But so there's an enormous hole in that explanation, and that's the one explaining the structural, inbuilt, long-term reasons for why the US, Mertz, Starmer would all be actively assisting Israel. Starmer didn't have the compromat on him. Therefore, he went to Cyprus and said, "Good job, boys, in sending all those planes to Israel during the genocide of Gaza." I've got a Mossad compromised MI6 behind me here with the photos, and they're about to release it. So if you could just keep going, I'll be safe. It's too weak. It's not enough. That's part of it, but
and the structural things are
that's. The big honking one is one you've elaborated on in the past, that the geographic location of Israel, oil, gas, it's the world's energy spigot, not Israel. The Groypers always say, "Whoa, hang on, there's no oil under Israel." No, but it's the region with all the oil. Not all the oil, but the key easily accessible oil. It shapes the world market. So it's that, century-long interest in the Middle East from World War One, Sykes-Picot, arguably starting World War One just to stop Germany having the Berlin to Baghdad railway, kick the Germans. No, this is for us. The Brits move in on Kuwait, beginning of British petroleum and all that.
It's funny that more people don't actually know that. I mean, I suppose you'll have to read a little bit of history, but people talk about this today and they just have this blinkered view where it's just they look at it the last however long they've been looking at it. They've got a 10-year window or whatever. They know the history of the past 10 years. They're talking about Israel, Palestine and Iraq and Iran and all that kind of stuff. And they don't even go back to, like you said, 100 years ago and just understand that these countries were all formed 100 years ago.
Yeah.
They were made 100 years ago by the West. The lines were drawn by the West 100 years ago. And then they should ask themselves, why were those drawn that way? What was the Western interest in this region that they actually carved it up after the First World War and the defeat of the Ottoman Empire, and they got access to the Ottoman Empire? Why did they draw all those lines in the map and control the entire area? Why were they so interested in it and different things like the Baghdad Railway and all that kind of stuff? Because if they did that, then they would suddenly go, okay, these people were really interested in this part of the world 100 years ago. And then they would scratch like a tiny little bit further, another half a millimeter off the surface. Go, oh, they were so interested in this area because of oil and natural resources. And then so that's why they got in there in the first place and set it up the way it is set up and effectively established Israel as a garrison there in order to control those resources. And then so we jump forward another 70 or 80 years to today. And it's like, well, has anything changed? I mean, do you think they're still interested? Well, they seem to be, because the garrison that they put there in order to control those resources is still being supported up the wazoo 100%. So it suggests that the resources, the original reason why they went to that region, the West went to that region and set it up, is still the dominant reason why they're there today. So that would kind of tend to undercut the Israel lobby, and America or even Trump is being forced to pander to Israel or do what Israel wants. Because it's like, there's a symbiotic relationship there that is very long, has a long history, and you can't really tease it apart, you know.
No.
That's why you can't really tease apart Mossad and the US deep state, let's say, or the US intelligences, or the British intelligences, or even the French intelligences. You can't separate the two of them, because at least on that topic, and probably on most others, at this point they're joined at the hip. There is no separation between them. They all speak the same language. They're all working towards the same goals, and they just divide up the different jobs that are needed, you know.
Yeah, based on their strengths and so on. Kit Klauenberg posts great stuff, contemporary and older events, where he highlights something that's usually forgotten, even in the dissident retelling of these events, like the coup to overthrow Mossadegh in 1953 in Iran. How everyone knows that Kermit Roosevelt, the cousin, or I think a cousin of FDR's or whatever, and the CIA were there. They don't know the Brits were there. They're big time. And even more recently, kind of Iran did a hack on Mossad, supposedly, and published just before this 12-day war started, evidence showing that Mossad influenced the IAEA.
Was it influence?
Not just
infiltrated
and got the names and addresses of scientists and their families, with which they assassinated them. But Klauenberg pointed out that there was a key workaround. Mossad couldn't just do that, apparently. They needed MI6. There was a guy called Langman who was instrumental in setting up that operation. British MI6 officer. So
they all work hand in glove,
yeah,
hand in hand. But so the interesting thing, it just occurred to me during the week there that when Trump was when they attempted to assassinate Trump, when they quote unquote attempted to assassinate Trump, it was pretty clear. I mean, obviously we'll never know now because it didn't happen, but it seemed pretty obvious to me that the news, actually just a day or two after the assassination attempt happened, the news that came out of the FBI just said in passing, "Oh, yeah, by the way, we've been following like Iranians or something, or Iranian-backed people in America who have been actively over the past few weeks planning or trying to set up an attempt to assassinate Trump." Because assassination seems to be like a hot topic right now. We just thought we'd throw this in here that, oh yeah, the Iranians were, we've been following a group were planning to assassinate Trump. I mean, didn't get very far, and they've kind of gone quiet now because of this. Because somebody else got in there first, because this guy Crooks had nothing to do with the Iranians, right?
Naturally.
Because we can't run with that, because there's no point, because Trump didn't get assassinated, you know. But it seems pretty clear that there was a thing being cooked in the background that was ready to be launched after a successful assassination of Trump. That this was Iran did it. And we would have had pretty quickly some kind of a declaration of war or something or other by Biden, Sleepy Joe via AutoPen, or Kamala, that they were going to go to war with Iran, and out of revenge or punishment. And that would have been serious casus belli. Like if they had been able to convince the MAGA crowd that it was Iran.
Yeah.
Well, geez, can you imagine that? It would be 9/11. Like it would have been 9/11 level
times 1,000.
Political capital, basically. Yeah. You know what I mean? And it would have been, you would have had everybody lobbying for turning Iran into a big fucking glass parking lot, you know?
Yeah.
But that was nixed.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just that Trump not being assassinated was a kind of like a let off, in a sense, for America in particular, and maybe the world, just because he survived, because of the effect of him being assassinated and the chaos within America, at least, that would have produced.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe even some kind of, who knows, some kind of public disorder, let's say, might have ensued. But maybe not if they had dropped the Iran did this, here's the evidence that the FBI is collecting. They would have capitalized on it and launched a war straight away. So anyway, not only did we get to keep Trump, but also we got to avoid what would have been probably a fairly serious much bigger than what we saw a few weeks ago, attack on Iran, and probably a lot of global chaos and stuff, But what's interesting is that given that was a plan being planned back then, and certainly the Israelis would have been involved that Israeli lobby, because bomb Iran has been Israel's on the top of their wish list for a long time. But the fact that was planned to happen after the assassination, had it been successful, means that it's been planned for quite a long time. But what's interesting is that it didn't happen. It goes off the burner. But within 6 months of Trump actually gaining the presidency, he bombs Iran. So there was a plan.
And in the interim,
they tried to put into place. It didn't go their way. They had to wait. Trump gets in and bombs Iran. But, like I said, we were saying previously, maybe the saving grace is that Trump was involved in it rather than
the excuse for doing it.
Rather than Autopen.
Yeah.
Autopen, i.e. the intel agencies and the deep state directing it, and especially on a groundswell of grief and anguish and hatred for Iran, Trump's able to do it in a more cold, calculated way, and actually even in terms of the public the climate around it, in terms of the population, quite a lot of resistance to him doing it. You know what I mean? So contrast those two scenarios of an attack in Iran that are about 9 months or so. 9 months between them. Where one could have happened 9 months ago after his assassination in July. If he had been assassinated, you would have had, America would have just put the serious smackdown on Iran. And you would have had probably a lot of turmoil, a lot of chaos in the Middle East and the world as a result. And then contrast that scenario to what we actually saw, which was this almost phony, not phony, but Iran war light, let's say. One calorie with Iran war light that lasted 12 days and it's all over and we move on.
Yeah.
It didn't make sense to me at the time why. I mean, what you're saying makes sense as far as they want to get rid of the Iran regime. They want to do the regime change. Having a plot, having all the paperwork, set out so that way they could create the narrative that Trump was assassinated by Iran in order to justify going into Iran. That all makes sense. What didn't make sense to me was the fact that, they decided not to go for it, or they attempted and failed. And they still went ahead with saying that Iran was planning to kill Trump.
Yeah.
Just as like a thing without teeth.
Well, I mean, they had put a lot of effort into, obviously it was much bigger than what they released, because if they had released it, would have been after Trump had been assassinated, it would have been all this evidence that was Iran behind it.
Yeah.
But they put a lot of effort into that plan. So they figured, well, we can just sit on this and it can go quiet, or we can release it. Okay, because I mean, think about it from the point of view of the people who actually tried to assassinate Trump and get a war in Iran afterwards. That's a big deal. That's a big sea change. That's a big, big event.
Mm-hmm.
And if you've got all your eggs in that basket, and then all of a sudden, through the grace of God, Trump turns his head and misses, it's all, I mean, you're just left going, holy fuck, what do we do now? Do we have a plan B? We didn't really have a plan B, at least not this plan B, or it didn't happen at all because we were so sure that it was going to happen. So we're kind of they're caught with their pants down, right? But maybe very quickly they decide, okay, look, I mean, it wasn't a big thing, it was released. And since then, there have been you may have noticed there were other reports about Iran. There was that one recently about the Iranians, at least in the UK. And I think there was something else. There was more rumours since then in the US media as well about Iran, Iranians trying to assassinate Trump.
Yeah.
Vague allegations made. Politicians know, supposedly.
Trump himself was tweeting, if Iran ever does this, I have a dead man switch.
So they wanted to keep that going. So the point is they pick up the ball pretty quickly afterwards and say, okay, well, release this thing where we have this. I mean, we can't really provide any information because it's like the FBI has a big stack of documents to show that it was Iran that just assassinated Trump.
Yeah.
Are we just going to throw all these away? We won't put a lot of work into this. We're just going to toss it? No, at least we'll just throw out the idea that, we were following, we were involved in an investigation where Iran was trying to assassinate Trump.
So at least it's somewhat associated.
And that's it. And if people go, okay, that's interesting. Can we see your file on it?
No.
No, you can't. Why? Well, because the file says that Iran assassinated Trump. And the problem is that he wasn't assassinated. So we can't really show you that part. The best we can say is that Iran was working on a plot to kill Trump.
Yeah. So I guess in that sense, you can kind of like create a fact on the ground. Well, and even if there's nothing there at the time, it creates a new card that could be played at some other point.
Well, not even that. The plan was to go ahead and do it. The plan B, maybe they did have a plan B and cobble together pretty quickly, was that they were going to get Trump to, which they did, to attack Iran.
Yeah.
So you need to put out some stuff like Iran's evil, Iran's been trying to assassinate Trump.
Well, yeah, that's what I mean.
Massage popular opinion and all that kind of stuff against Iran.
But again, the only person that I've seen who actually believes that is Mark Levine.
Well, apparently politicians do. There's some, I can't remember which politician it was, saying basically that he had seen, who was he talking to? I don't know who he was talking to, but he was talking to the media and saying that they had seen evidence. Maybe somebody's talking to Tucker, actually. It was fucking, you know who it was?
Was it Teddy?
Yeah.
Teddy Cruz?
Teddy Cruz said in the interview with Tucker that he had seen it and that they know that Iran is doing it. So he was all over the whole thing about bomb Iran, and that was a few weeks before the actual bombing of Iran, or attacking Iran, the Israeli attacking Iran. So obviously it was planned to, plan B was, we'll go ahead and get Iran in one way or another. But the problem is that now Trump is in charge, and he's the one who's running the show, and he's not going to allow it to go to the point of what we wanted it to go to, which was a major.
Well, those tweets on Tuesday 24th, where he's publicly ordering Netanyahu to turn the planes around, then shouting at the press that they don't know what the fuck they're doing before he gets on the plane for Europe. Right. He looked pissed. He sounded, that wasn't me and Netanyahu super tight on a plan to cause a ruse. No, that was public.
Basically, it's complicated, and Trump isn't the savior that people think he is, because it's simply not practical for him to do it. It's not possible for him to do it, right? You don't just walk into Mordor, right? Mordor has way too much power, right? The most you can do is stay their hand to some extent, or play the game, play Trump's kind of propaganda reality TV show game where you talk loud and shout and say you're going to get Iran and threaten terrible destruction, and you'll all be sorry, I'm going to blow this up, I'm going to blow that up. It's almost like he's trying to fool these people. Imagine you have a bunch of rabid warmongers who are salivating for more blood and more destruction and more massive death than ever before, and you realize that, and that includes the Israelis and Netanyahu, but you realize that they're fucking nuts, basically, and this is your enemy, effectively, in terms of what you want to do compared to what they want to do. But you have to appease them, because you can't just kick them out. So this naive idea of Trump's going to walk in and make America great again and take over because he's the commander-in-chief is just like a super naive perspective on how politics works and the nature of America and the nature of the deep state and how entrenched it is and what Trump is actually up against. People should have learned that from this first term, like when they saw what happened. I mean, they basically hobbled his entire first term.
Yeah.
They had complete control of the Justice Department, complete control of all intelligences.
Everything.
I have removed all American troops from Syria. They've gone home.
Yeah.
Then you learn, literally the day after the January 6th, the guy at the State Department responsible was like, they never left. We actually tripled their numbers. We just didn't tell them.
Okay. Yeah. So, you always have to just take that as a given if you want to understand things, but better take that as a given and realize that Trump is trying to do what he thinks is best, but he is required to operate within the confines that have been set for him.
Yeah.
So the glass is half full perspective. Well, they actually cancel each other out. The House always wins, so they got their war, but at least it was under Trump's watch because that was much sharper, shorter.
Yeah.
But for now, because the House Mordor, it's still Mordor we're talking about,
Right?
And it is more than Israel. It's the investment in it from Europe and the UK is just as intense.
I don't know if how Europe is invested in Iran being attacked and all that kind of stuff. I mean, they haven't come out in the same way, in the same level of enthusiasm for it. I mean, in fact, quite the opposite, really. But so I don't think the way the Europeans are more concerned about Russia and Ukraine, and they know like the potential hit the global markets would take, especially Europe at this point would be in seriously up shit creek without a paddle if global markets were to.
Okay, but then
especially
primarily
resources in terms of especially oil and gas, basically. So I don't think that Europe wants to see that at all. You know, they give lip service to it, but they don't want to see it at all. It's this cabal, like I said, of the US deep state and Israelis who are basically trying to just stop thinking of them as different entities. They're not different entities. They're exactly the same. There is no difference. They're the same. CIA, MI6, Mossad, the same.
Yeah.
Put those three words together and make a new word and just start using that, please.
Yeah.
Mew.
Yeah. So Netanyahu's going back to DC tomorrow.
There's still an unanswered question, though, as to what these people actually want.
Oh, yeah.
In destroying Iran,
yeah,
and all that kind of stuff, and the difference.
Well, here I would, yeah,
the difference between their philosophy and Trump's philosophy. You know, but this is the big thing that no one actually defines. I haven't seen anybody define it. I've seen Tucker Carlson talk to fucking 7,000 people at this point, all who are experts on it. And not one of them have actually defined what the two competing philosophies are. And it just blows my mind. Even that guy, what do you call him, was on the other day.
Scott Horton.
You know, he didn't even go there either. You know, he had all the facts and figures of all the different details of how it all went about, but he couldn't put it in context. He couldn't actually set it in context and make it make sense.
He talks about the neocons and stresses that they're not all Israel firsters.
Well, a lot of them are. He said some aren't neocons. Some of them involved weren't neocons, but the neocons, I think, are Israel firsters. But they always have been. But
anyway, like he did say they're not the only show in town in the US, of course.
Yeah,
they're not the house. The house is big and it contains other factions.
Yeah, but the thing is he didn't explain it either.
He did
explain what exactly those people want. Yeah. What their agenda is. He gives you all the details of what they did in terms of funding, arming and training Al Qaeda, different presidents. He talked about Bush and Obama and all this kind of stuff, and the different administrations, but basically saying they're irrelevant, obviously, because it's the kind of deep state or the Washington establishment who are behind it, who are pushing it. But he didn't actually explain what those people want. Like we have these clearly defined terms: deep state against Trump, right?
Yeah.
Deep state, and I would put deep state along with Israel. Their agendas being pretty much exactly the same.
Yeah.
But he didn't even explain what they want in doing all this. He explains all the things they did, funding Al Qaeda and you know, Libya, destroying Libya, jihadis in Libya, then take the jihadis, the rat lines, Seymour Hersh's rat lines from Libya to Syria to overthrow Assad, blah blah blah. But he never actually explains why they're doing all this. No one does, ever. It stands out.
Tucker basically asked him one question, and then Scott Horton began his detailed timeline spanning back to 1979. And that was, why are we at war with Iran? So I suppose part of that question is Iran the key part of the story. In other words, have all of the smaller wars, smaller in terms of the size of those countries.
Yeah. The seven
since
countries.
9/11, have they actually? Because it makes sense if you look at the last one, which is Syria, done with a view to having this platform to now attack Iran. Those two make a consequential, progressive, logical next step sense. Has it always been about Iran is the goal, or is that not even the issue? Is Iran's
the goal, but just as one of seven, and it's a harder one to do. So you take out the smaller ones who are a problem. You know what I mean? Like the other countries, for the most part, not all of them, but especially Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Libya to an extent, were the kind of the guard, if you know what I mean, for Iran.
Yeah,
you know, Iran's the final boss. You have to beat the henchmen up.
The final
boss, right?
Okay.
You don't go to the final boss before you deal with it. Anybody's played video games knows you have to deal with the henchman before you deal with the final boss, right? That's how it happens.
Because if you go to fight the final boss first, then you're not just fighting the final boss, you're fighting the final boss plus all of his henchmen, which is why you fight the henchmen first.
Right.
Yeah. I'll come back. We'll come back. I just want to say that Horton knew the facts and figures, and it was interesting that he could say when the policy changed with respect to Iran. Just thought it was interesting. So the US had there had been Iran-Contra in the Reagan years. That was a misnomer. It was actually Israel-Contra. Israel was the middleman. Israel was giving the weapons to Iran. And so was the CIA, but Israel was a big rout because it was the Iran-Iraq war. Also, policy-wise, there was no beef between Israel and Iran until 1993. It changed. And he just noted that it's close to the Oslo Accords and then subsequently the assassination of Rabin and the rise of Likud and Netanyahu. He's not saying anything by that. He's just noting the timeline. I thought that was interesting that the policy shift is that old. It's not been since forever. It's not because they're mullahs and they're standing up for Palestine going back to 1979. It actually suddenly shifted in 93.
Yeah.
What happened that summer? The beginning of massive bomb attacks in Buenos Aires against Jewish targets that were blamed on Hezbollah and Iran.
Yeah. So, but why was the policy shift then? It's pretty clear.
Yeah.
He doesn't say, and that's what annoys me about it.
Yeah.
I'm listening and I'm asking, and I'm just waiting for him to say it, and it's pretty obvious why the policy shifted then. What happened 2 years previously?
91, the Iraq War 1.
Just before that.
The fall of the USSR.
Yes. Obvious.
Yeah. They had a
sitting there as a massive like world event, and he's like, no, that's got nothing to do with it, but obviously has everything to do with it. Do you know what I mean? I mean, all the stuff that came before the fall of the Soviet Union, all of the messing around in the Middle East was in the context of the Cold War and the Soviet Union. It was Cold War philosophy, and that had been going
competition
on for quite a long time.
Access to and influence over the world's energy spigot of the Middle East.
But in the context of the world being divided between
two
East and West,
two philosophies, and two philosophies,
and two major superpowers.
Yeah.
When that one superpower goes away, then you have a change in policy. Obviously, it radically changes the entire kind of board.
It's all open to us now. Let's go in there and.
Well, it's different, but then it's also these people seem to have a lot of prescience. Because within a few years of that, again in the 90s, towards the late 90s, when the Soviet Union is in the former Soviet Union, now the Russian Federation, I suppose, or Russia, is in disarray.
Yeah,
they
immediately
start planning for their war on terror and develop their PNAC documents.
Yeah,
that effectively, the core of them is that we need to now project American power into this part of the world where that is now, well, there's a power vacuum in order to sweep it all up, get as much as we can.
Yeah,
right? Because it's changed. There was a detente, there was a stalemate for most of the Cold War. Lines were fairly clearly drawn. There was all sorts of messing around and attempts to do this and that and the other, but it was still there was only so much could be done. But with the Soviet Union gone, suddenly now it's all opened up, and we're going to grab as much as we can. That's why we needed to project American military power into that area. And where did they pick? They picked the Middle East, and they picked Afghanistan. In fact, they picked Afghanistan first, which is that very important central region that immediately harks back to pre-Cold War and 18th and 19th century great games between the Russian Empire and Western empires. So now they suddenly pivot back to that because they realize, even though Russia's in disarray in the 1990s, they plan for the fact that it's going to be back. They tried to screw it over in the 1990s. It doesn't work. Putin arrives in 2000, and then it starts building. But even before that happened, even before Putin arrived on the scene, these people were aware that they were hedging for the scenario that they wouldn't be able to just walk in there and scoop up all the remnants of the Soviet, of the communist part of the world.
They almost knocked out the Chinese as well in 89.
Right. So, but they were hedging for the fact that they wouldn't be able to do that, and that they were going to now in the 21st century have to deal with eventually a resurgent Russia in a new configuration, and obviously China as well coming on stream. So that then changed their policy towards the Middle East and everything progressively. Obviously, it's an evolving thing where they see how it goes. They try one thing, they start getting pushback from Russia and China and all this kind of stuff. So
1993 is also when, it's a bit later, but still mid-90s, first time Russian and Chinese academics get together and come up with multipolarity. And then Yeltsin and then Premier, forget his name, sit down and say, yeah, this sounds good. The M word comes online.
Yeah. It was a dangerous time. It was like when the Soviet Union falls in America for that period of time, immediately afterwards is now the only single superpower in the world, and it sees, okay, look, we get to control all of the world now. Beforehand, it was only half the world. Now we get to control all of the world. Awesome. That's what we've always wanted. I've always wanted a whole world just for me. But then at the same time, there were, in order to achieve that, to try to do it by starting the war on terror and war in Iraq and all the rest. But they're aware that it's equally likely that after the fall of the Soviet Union, you're going to have different powers that come out of this effect of the collapse of the Soviet Union and the restructuring of regional alliances and all that kind of stuff. You could have what the Russians and the Chinese were actually talking about then was multipolarity happening. So they wanted to prevent that from happening as well, because their goal was basically, they could have just got on board with multipolarity at that time and said, okay, let's, which is kind of what Trump is trying to do now. He's basically trying to do what should have happened back then, what saner heads might have, if saner heads had prevailed after the collapse of the Soviet Union in America. If saner heads had prevailed then, they would have adopted the policies that Trump is now adopting 30 years later.
Well, this is,
25, 30 years later. And he's trying hard to do that, and it's like, sorry, it's gone too far.
This is why I keep saying what you mentioned at the outset, two philosophies. What's the difference between Trump's philosophy and the neocon/deep states? In the end, I see this is possibly why you don't get an explanation from any of them. How cognizant are they that they're taking their behaviors and their actions and their policies on individual issues are informed by the cleavage of our time? So back then it was liberal Western democracies, capitalism versus communism. And both wore those ideologies kind of on the sleeve. The teams were branded with it. You could recognize it. And even if you couldn't recognize it, you could impute, that country in Latin America is going pinko.
Yeah.
And it's associated in propaganda in people's minds. Kremlin control, smack, right, done. But now it's like,
you also had
it's a much wiser philosophy that's emerged from the East. Multipolarity, win-win, mutual. It's very like sedate. I respect yourself, and you respect mine.
Well, it's also a lot harder for the US to fight against it or to denounce it.
It's hard that Trump himself, as publicly, his Secretary of State, has embraced it. officially, at least in an interview, somewhat, he's talking about, and he didn't embrace. He
Marco
didn't say.
Rubio, yeah.
He didn't say.
We support
as
it.
part
He
of my. We're joining this ideology. No, he's acknowledging that it is an objective process that's ongoing.
Exactly. Yeah, but also, and maybe you don't get as much people. Well, you don't get official people, like as in politicians and stuff, openly stating it. They have to fall back on, like beforehand it was, they could easily wage wars and coups and all that kind of stuff. This is the US and in the West to some extent, because they were fighting communism. They had the moral high ground. Nobody would disagree with it. Communism was evil, and so they had moral right to do that. When there's no longer any communism, evil communism to fight against, what are you actually fighting against? What's your reason for being belligerent and warmongery now against these other countries when there's no more communism? Well, you have to make up something, right? Evil Putin. So pathetic, like, you just go, oh. I mean, communism was gifted to them on a plate in a certain sense, you know what I mean? Where it was like, nobody questioned it. Of course, everybody knows communism is evil and you should be fighting against it. Yes, go ahead and do that stuff. That's great. Have some more wars. Great. Fight communism. Communism is no longer there. What are you going to do? Well, it's because there are evil people. Well, of course, in later years, evil Putin, but initially they immediately supplanted evil communism with evil Muslim terrorism.
Yeah.
They needed
a vehicle.
They needed
to construct a new phony ideological cleavage with which to attack the real source behind it.
Right.
And the real source behind it may not even have been articulated in their own minds what it is, but they know it's something non-American. They come from this I don't know if it's philosophical. They literally are like that guy in Full Metal Jacket. The colonel who's questioning why the hell the hero of the story has a peace sign on his forehead, but saying, kill the gooks or something on his jacket. What's this, son? What? He's trying to explain it. And the colonel's like, listen, son, we're fighting this war because we're Americans. We believe inside every gook is an American dying to get out. That's probably the most articulated where they're coming from. They think everyone wants to be like us,
Well, that's the narrative, but behind it is just raw, naked.
No, it's just raw, naked power grab. Yeah, exactly. That was what I was going to say. Was that, for instance, when Cruz went on to talk with Tucker Carlson and just botches the hell out of it and comes across sounding like an idiot, it's because like you were saying, when communism was around, you had something that you could fight against. Yeah. You had something where you could hide the pure lust for power.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it became easy to hide that lust for power because it was objectively bad what was going on in all those places. So it became a mask that you could wear and get away with it. But the thing is, with that mask unusable now, you have to create one. And the more, I guess, like, divorced from reality that mask is, the less effective it becomes. So now you have, we're doing this because evil Muslims are going to WMD us to death.
20 years later, Al-Qaeda's latest leader, now ISIS leader, is a good man. And he's the leader, and I'm lifting the sanctions against Syria.
Yeah. And so with Cruz, and he's talking about, well, we have to support Israel because that was what I was taught in Sunday school. And it's like, that is the most retarded thing I have ever heard in my life for so many reasons.
That's why Joe called it out and said he doesn't believe that himself.
Exactly. No, that's total bullshit. He doesn't believe a word of that. And all it is just another mask to hide what's really there, which is, the competing philosophies. One is, like, we live in the big world. We're all, capable of very destructive things, or we can, kind of work together and cooperate and everybody wins, as one philosophy. And the other one is, I dominate and take everything.
Yeah.
And that's it. So when those are your two options, and you're a power-hungry psychopath who has been living high on the hog for quite some time, and abusing that power and using it, for shits and giggles.
The concept of a diet is
antithetical.
Like existential
it's
death.
Existential death. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So what's being fought over by these people is essentially, and they're trying to fight back the tide of multipolarity, basically. And by multipolarity, I mean, Eurasian powers coming on stream, like primarily Russia and China coming on stream and trying to establish a new world order, with Eurasia as the center of the world, basically, which it is the center of the world because it's got 80% of the world's population, 80% of the world's resources, and the Americans, don't want that to happen because that sidelines America and leaves them with nothing, basically.
So in that respect, Iran is not the end; it's the ends that justify the means. It's
not the end in
personal.
itself.
It's not personal.
No.
And it's going to have to do with nukes. But I mean, the other question is Israel. How do you explain what's Israel's agenda? Well, Israel, if they're just like part and parcel of the deep staters in the US, they're basically aligned with the deep staters, and they just want the West to remain supreme as well. So they're serving their function as a Western deep state garrison in the Middle East in order to control the Middle East, to push back Russia and China, and maintain control over that region for America in perpetuity. Israel also has its own.
Well, it would like to be
personal. It wants to survive as well, and wants to be as powerful as it possibly can. They really don't really want to just be an American garrison in the Middle East. They want to run the Middle East themselves.
Yeah.
And at the same time, it's also like a ponerological issue where Israel has become, or arguably always was, a completely pathologized state, where up is down, black is white, killing is saving, like murder is good, like all of that kind of thing. So you have people who live there and are doing the most horrible and horrendous things and apparently enjoy doing it. Raping the Palestinians to death and torturing them to death and so on and so forth. And not only do they enjoy doing it at the time, they enjoy going around to the rest of the world and the rest of the world shaking their hand and saying, "Oh, you're doing such good work." And so
they want to ponerize as many people as possible.
Yeah, exactly.
Bring them into their sordid little reality. Yeah, and that's a big test there in a certain sense for ordinary people around the world as well, and not they can see evil whenever it's shoved in their face, or whether they go, "Oh, look, yes, I believe what you say. When you say that evil you're doing, that's not evil. That's good. Okay.
Oh, it's not evil.
It's a simple test, and a lot of people are failing it, but I think there's more people who can see than are let on. But the people who can see tend to kind of keep quiet, because they tend to be kind of good people, and good people aren't the loudest, most shouty, most arrogant, most violent people by definition. So they tend to keep quiet. So you don't get a good read on how many people actually see what's going on.
At the same time, if you were to say something about this particular group, you get labeled with all sorts of dirty names, and you have life issues ranging from, losing your job to getting debanked to et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. That's the system. The whole system is behind it, Because the whole system, that's debanked, and, losing your job, corporations, they're all hooked into the Western, Western globalist system, and it's in their interest to, they all those big banks and big corporations, etc., are all big and corporate and globalist because of Western hegemony, American primarily hegemony. So of course they're going to fall in line with the dominant discourse, which supports that hegemony, and one of which is, don't say anything bad about Israel or you're a dirty anti-Semite and you're going to lose your bank account, because you're trying to undermine Western values, quote unquote Western values. Yeah, and there's other stuff going on recently. We can talk a little bit about it. We'll talk a bit about Iran. Like, okay, so Trump nixed it. I don't think it's over. Bibi's probably going to bomb Iran again in some form or other, kick things off. We'll have to wait and see how that actually transpires. but Bibi, the Israelis aren't done. The Israelis / deep state aren't done with Iran. They want to. They're not stupid. They know what Trump did, basically, which was curtail their ambitions. And
Trump's going to have to deal with it, but he's not likely to give them the green light for an absolute total destruction of things.
No. Which is what
that's
they would
my
have
cope.
to do. Yeah. Yeah. Because he knows it's not good for his agenda.
Yeah.
No, ultimately, Trump's agenda is to capitalize on what America has, and it has a lot, as the global hegemon for the past 100 years. But it's progressively losing that position and that status and that power and that influence.
Yes.
So instead of going, because obviously the end result of that confrontation is that America has to go all out zero sum war with these competitors, right? And then everybody dies. So Trump's like, yeah, it's probably not a good day if everybody dies. So how can we go about this in a different way? Well, his basic philosophy is, in this new world that's pushing towards multipolarity, he needs to get on board. America needs to get on board with it, make the best deals with everybody, the other countries as possible, maintain America's influence as much as possible, but short of actually getting involved in direct confrontational war with, or direct confrontation with the major powers who would be a zero-sum game and everybody would die. And he basically, I think he's explicitly, I don't know if he explicitly said it or someone said it, I can't remember if he said it, but anyway, his philosophy is to divide the world up into spheres of influence based on the relative power of the different countries. Basically, in a nutshell, it's like he wants to divide the world up between America, Russia, and China. That's in very broad terms.
Yeah.
And negotiate who gets what and how it works out, who gets the influence where and what. But at the same time, so that kind of agenda, you can see how it overlaps a little bit with the deep state's agenda. They would try to use him and say, look, Mr. President, you're on board with using American influence and power that it has around the world to get the best deal for America, right? And that means, like, as much as these other countries, Russia and China, for example, or we might have to enter into some kind of multipolar world organization with them, we want to get the best deal for us as possible, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we do have to push back against them. You would agree with that, Mr. President, right? We have to push back against these because they will take more from us than we might be willing to accept if we just were to walk away. That's why we're not walking away from the Middle East.
Mm-hmm.
That's why Trump's not just walking away from any armed intervention or military intervention. He realizes it has to happen, you know. In any negotiation, you come in with as much of your power and influence as possible in order to get the best deal, right? That's Trump's philosophy. But that kind of overlaps in a certain sense where you could, with the deep state agenda, where you could get Trump to, you know, take action or take more aggressive action against Russia or China than he might want to, you know, that his philosophy might normally allow for, you know,
Mm-hmm.
And to threaten the interests of Russia, for example, or China in a way that would, you know, force them to maybe take military action. So it's a balancing act all the time. You know what I mean? You have to go only so far. And this is something that Putin has repeatedly stressed. It's like, look, the whole Ukraine thing, you just didn't respect our interests, you know? You didn't respect our national security interests. You talk about all countries, you know, having a right to have their national security respected. But you in the West, up until recent anyway, have not respected our national interests. So you have to do that. It's part of the rules based order, basically, where everybody respects it. I mean, at least normally, at least in the Americans give lip service to that, right?
Yeah.
While respecting all countries' national interests. And Putin's like, you haven't been doing that. So
BB's 3 times now in DC this year, which is a lot. But there's been now another Trump-Putin phone call. I think the 4th one this week.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't like it. He didn't like it at all.
Is that what he said? Because
Well, yeah.
then on Air Force, he can tweet that he's not happy, blah, blah, blah. But then on Air Force One, he responds to a journalist and called Putin a professional.
Yeah. That was what
Putin says he liked the call too. It was on July 3rd, so he congratulated the president on their Independence Day tomorrow and reminded him of historic American-Russian ties, namely in the creation of the United States when it seceded from the British Empire, and again coming in on the Union side in the Civil War. Putin will always try to hit the good points. You know, we don't have to be enemies. Which maybe he heard this because Peskov has said he's been on record as saying that every tweet, quip, or Air Force One comment that Trump makes, they make sure that Putin gets it. Putin wants everything. Even if you think it's just silly or if it contradicts what he said 10 minutes ago, apparently they're under orders to get the message to him. But so I think something's going on there where Putin's aware that Trump's dancing around, but he wants to hear it all for maybe something that's coming between the heated tweets.
Between the lines. Yeah.
Then 3 days later, Macron called Putin, ostensibly to discuss Iran and its adherence to the non-proliferation treaty, blah, blah, blah. Quite a turnaround from floating the idea of a Grande Armée to invade of Euro peacekeepers entering Ukraine. That was just 4 months ago. Remember that? We were always like, oh my God, can they do it, Joe? Can they do it? And Joe's like, no, they're not going to do it. So, yeah, just the act of regular calls, regular meetings. The US, whether it likes it or not, is being entrained into this new world order. Circumstances are forcing it. Maybe it wouldn't be quite so... It wouldn't be happening at quite this pace if it wasn't Trump in charge, but... But then, you know, you get a little bit of this and that. In the meantime, Senator Graham is pushing, quote, a bill that proposes a 500% tariff on imports from all countries that continue to purchase Russian oil and energy products. That right there would be global economic foobar. I mean...
You know, how's he going to do that when it's all rebranded?
Right. No, it's Indian oil.
That's just more Trump. That's more... that would require tariffs, you know. So start sanctioning. You're going to tariff or sanction or something India. Tariff and sanction India and everybody else. Like, this is Lindsey Graham thinks that America can tariff the whole world. Like, I mean, Trump already tried his tariffs and it didn't work out very well. America was going to suffer seriously as a result. So it's obviously a non-starter, you know. But Lindsey Graham's one of those people who drinks bottled water with two hands. Anyway,
well, his counterparts over in London got an article out in the Telegraph this week, making the case for why we should now consider India an enemy because of its back channel support for Russia by buying all the oil, you know.
Yeah. Well, what do you want? Like, it's like imagine calling someone an enemy because they buy food in the local store, like, you know.
Two philosophies.
Yeah, seriously.
What are you buying food for?
What? Do you need to live?
What are you, evil?
You trying to survive or something? Don't you know how evil that is? Trying to exist?
And most of that's coming right here to Europe.
Yeah. So anyway, Iran got bombed with the huge, awesome, obliterating bunker busters, and nobody knows really what effect it had. But Iran doesn't have a bomb. Iran has a bomb, but it doesn't have the means of delivery, which is is most likely the case, because that's the hardest thing to do, actually. They've had a long time to develop enriched uranium and all that kind of stuff. They've been doing it for a very long time. That's why they've had the whole program. So they undoubtedly have enriched uranium to the point of making a bomb, and have made a bomb, because that's obviously would go ahead. Imagine you had enriched uranium, enough uranium, like to the sufficient, the uranium-235 to the sufficient level, 90% or whatever, let's say, and now you can make a bomb. But you're going to go ahead and make a bomb, you know. But there's a big difference between doing that, a big step between doing that and then producing a bomb that's small enough to fit on a missile. So Iran very likely has, basically they have a World War II bomb. They have a big boy bomb.
Mm-hmm.
They would have to do, if they wanted to use it, they would have to like do what the Americans did in Japan. They fly it over and drop it out of a plane. I don't know how close they are to being able to miniaturize it enough to put it on a suitable missile. So in that sense, Iran doesn't have a bomb. It doesn't have an effective bomb. Let's say they have a bomb that could try and sneak it somewhere and blow it up. But like, obviously, the whole evil Iran wants to blow us up with a bomb. It's just nonsense. It's just pure propaganda.
Yeah.
Well, they've already said when they began the attacks that our target here is Iran's missile program.
Yeah,
not nuclear as such.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe they put the two together.
Yeah. Well, I suppose
we need to retard it by a decade or something.
Yeah. Well, I don't think they can do that. That's even harder to do than retarding their nuclear program. That's just knowledge.
No, their missile development.
But that's even harder to do than their nuclear program. How are you going to retard their missile development program? I mean, that's fairly basic. At this point, they have so many. They've showed they have so many and fairly sophisticated missiles. How are you going to do that? You're going to blow them all up and then we'll just make some more. It takes a lot longer it takes a lot shorter time to make missiles than it does to make nuclear weapons, But the reason they want to attack, and the reason Trump signed on to, getting rid of their nuclear program and stuff was because Iran has always used its nuclear program as leverage, basically. You know what I mean? It's not even a secret. That's clearly what they've done repeatedly over the whole. For instance, JCPOA was signed, and even before that, their negotiating strategy was: look, we want to make our own. We want to have a nuclear powered nation. We want to develop our own nuclear power plants and for the different civilian purposes. And of course, that implies that if you freely do that, then you have the possibility of enriching uranium to become a nuclear weapon equipped nation as well. But all along, they've been enriching uranium in order to use it as leverage. So we enrich uranium, we have this capability, but you can come and take it away as long as in return for lifting of sanctions. That's what they've been aiming for all along. And that's probably what this Tucker Carlson has interviewed the Iranian president, and that's pretty much what he's going to say. This sanctions regime that has been on Iran for so long, is Iran's not happy with it. It retards their economy and their development and all that kind of stuff. And we want those sanctions lifted. How best can we get those sanctions lifted? Well, let's threaten them with us becoming a nuclear-powered, nuclear weapon-equipped nation, and then use that as a bargaining chip to get the sanctions lifted. So we're giving up something that we see. If you want to have something to give up in exchange for lifting sanctions, you have to have something valuable, something that other people want or don't want you to have. And if it's something they don't want you to have, then you get it. And then you say, we'll give it to you if you do what we want. That's pretty much the strategy. And that's been the strategy all along. And the reason... But the main reason that Iran has been sanctioned for so long and has been country non grata, well, it's the same reason that the other countries were Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Lebanon. They were all countries non grata. It goes back to the fact that America invaded the Middle East, or the West invaded the Middle East 100 years ago and took control of it, to take control of the resources, and the countries and the governments of those countries in that region who actually owned all the resources were like, what the fuck? We don't like this. And America was like, what do you mean you don't like us? And they're like, we don't like you because you're basically occupying our countries and overthrowing our governments and stealing our resources. And America was, well, that's a kind of a deal breaker because we're going to continue to do that. And then those countries are like, well, we're going to continue to not like you because of it. And then America's like, well, we're going to call you like evil Muslim terrorists then, so that we can continue to occupy and invade your countries and steal your resources. And they're like, well, okay, whatever. And that's what they've been doing.
And
it's changed over the past 20 years, obviously, since 9/11. 9/11 was an attempt to get in there and undo all of that and remake the Middle East and turn these countries into compliant countries that would, instead of saying, we don't like you Americans because you steal our resources, into countries that have governments that say, oh, America, thank you very much for stealing our resources. We love you. Thanks very much.
Steal me harder.
Steal me harder, daddy. So that's basically what the history of the past 25 years is.
And so that's the goal with Iran. They want a regime that says,
yes,
like the Shah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Steal me harder. Steal my stuff harder.
And it's not.
Take control of me harder.
Take control of me harder. Make sure I
de-independendize me harder.
Make sure I sell on the market. Give primacy to the US dollars.
The US dollar
as payment.
And then align with the West.
Invest it in London and New York.
Align with the West. Yeah. Don't be aligning with those other weird Eurasian, Chinese, and Russian people. That's not allowed because that spells the end of America. So stop doing that. But those countries are like, well, I don't know. We're going to keep our options open. Well, then you're an evil Muslim terrorist.
Right.
You can be a nice, progressive, liberal, Middle Eastern democracy, or you could be a bunch of evil Muslim terrorists. And the only thing that makes the difference between the two is whether or not you align with us.
Yeah.
In fact, you can be a bunch of evil Muslim terrorists, and we will call
like
you
in Syria,
and we will call you
Al-Shura.
A nice, liberal, democratic, Western, Middle Eastern country. Or you can be, in reality, a nice Middle Eastern, democratic, Western country, and we will still call you a bunch of evil Muslim terrorists. Because you see, we establish what the reality is. We create reality because we are reality creators. As Karl Rove said. So, so right now, that's what's going on. And there's shit going on in Azerbaijan. There's always shit going on in Azerbaijan. Is there ever not shit going on in Azerbaijan? What's it called? The capital of BP? The Republic of BP?
The Republic of British Petroleum, yeah.
Baku was, yeah. That's Caspian Sea oil. All sorts of plans to get Caspian Sea oil from Azerbaijan over through Turkey and over to the west. That whole region used to be part of, so we're talking just north of Iran here. We're talking about Azerbaijan on the Caspian, Armenia, up against Turkey, Georgia, on the Black Sea, and then Russia. It used to be part of the Persian Empire, basically.
Right.
It was all part of the Persian Empire. The Russians fought the Persians over it, and the Russians got the Persians. Got that area from the Persians back in the day, back in the 19th century.
So was Azerbaijan then USSR? And
yes.
It's a former Soviet republic.
It is. As is Armenia and Georgia.
Right.
So the deal going down there is that
the Russians...
well, you had that event last year where a Ukrainian drone was flying over Azerbaijan, a so-called Ukrainian drone, an assumed Ukrainian drone, was flying over Azerbaijan. The plane was going from Baku to somewhere else. Anyway, it was going somewhere in Azerbaijan. The airliner, and there was an assumed Ukrainian drone that must have flown too close to the plane. And Russian air defense is close to the border because the northern border of Azerbaijan is in Russia. This was assumed by the Russians to be a Ukrainian drone attack on one of many that have been going on all over the place. And there had been ones previous to that had taken that route to try and... Because the Iranians are targeting wherever they can, right? Whatever access they have to fly drones into Russia and target Russian whatever installations, whatever Russian military or oil, whatever installations that Ukrainians have been trying to get in there from many different areas, and they've been trying this path beforehand. So a presumed Ukrainian drone flew too close to, we have to assume, flew too close to a Azeri Airlines plane, and the Azeri Airlines plane took a hit and crashed and killed a bunch of people.
Yeah.
Russians apologize and all that kind of stuff. But it makes you wonder because the Israelis have a well-known presence in Azerbaijan, you know. And they have a history of doing that kind of thing to sour relations between two countries because Azerbaijan and Russia generally have had a good relationship.
Musk is trying to keep
good relationship.
Good, yeah.
They've had a good relationship. Like last August, Putin visited Baku last August, and then Aliyev visited Moscow in October. But the heads of the CIS heads of state summit, and that was just before it was the airline quote unquote tragedy last December. Which the Azeris weren't happy about it, and there was some question over it, and it didn't get any coverage. I didn't see any conspiracy theories about it, but I'm just throwing one in there that it could have been not Ukrainian, or could have been Ukrainian, but Ukrainian in line with the Brits, for example, and the Israelis, whatever, or the Americans, deep state typers, to our relationship between Russia and Azerbaijan by taking down an Azeri airliner full of people.
It reminds me of the Turks shooting down a Russian jet,
right?
Which sparked a standoff between Erdogan and Putin that lasted 6 months, and it went from 0 to 60 in no time. There were massive sanctions. Russian tourists not allowed. Bilateral sanctions, and so this is similar in that Azerbaijan is obviously close with Turkey.
Yes,
because they're all Turkish brothers.
They're all Turkmen. They have a summit of Turkish peoples, or whatever, every year, whatever, that extends over from Turkey over to Azerbaijan and then over to the stands, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan. They have the summit every year where we're all Turks, we're all Turkey people, Turkish speaking people, and let's all hang out and do stuff together, you know. And that's, you have to wonder. There's a lot of claims that Erdogan has this idea of recreating the Ottoman Empire, or some version of the Ottoman Empire.
Yeah, you know? And the Central Asian Ottoman Empire, which never existed. Okay,
but basically extending its influence. Maybe that's the wrong term to use, but to extend its influence, Turkey's influence.
There is ethnic, connection, ties,
right? And that would be a. You would see how Turkish, if Erdogan has those aims to expand his influence, that the West, the US and Brits and Israelis would get on board with that, to encourage that, in order to pull Azerbaijan into Turkish/Western, or at least take it away from Russia, let's say.
Yeah, there are rumors that Turkey wants to build a base right there on Azerbaijan's border with Russia.
Right.
Turkey would be NATO, therefore.
Of course,
but that's still a rumor.
But there's a corridor. Basically, Azerbaijan is broken up just north of that kind of peninsula, or that part of Iran that extends north into the Caucasus. You have Azerbaijan on the one side, and then you have Armenia on the left. But just part of Armenia, basically, is Azerbaijan. It's an exclave, I think they call it.
Yeah.
Basically, it's a piece of Azerbaijan that is completely outside of the borders of the rest of Azerbaijan, let's say, and it's within the borders of Armenia, bordering Turkey, bordering Iran, and actually bordering Turkey through a small little corridor. So supposedly Turkey has there's this plan to have, because there was a Azeri Georgian war in 2020 that Putin Armenian in 2020 that
over the Karabakh
the disputed part between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and the Russians have since 2020 been mediators of it, right? Yeah. And part of the agreement was that there would be some kind of a corridor through Armenia from this exclave in Armenia to Azerbaijan proper, to link the two parts of the country, right?
Yeah.
The Armenians aren't hot about it, whatever, but the idea is that then that would link Turkey to Azerbaijan and through this corridor to the rest of Azerbaijan, and then over to the Caspian, and then Turkey would be able to, have who knows what,
Well, there already is
trade basically between all
Yeah.
these, because like they have this organization of Turkish speaking peoples, whatever, blah blah blah, that Turkey hosts a summit for every year, or they host a summit for. So it's all about trade, at least partly trade between these, con-specific peoples, let's say Turkic peoples, and that would increase Turkey's influence into the Central Asian stands, etc. Blah blah blah. And so this recent thing with this recent starting of relationships between Azerbaijan and Russia. So you had the plane shot down last December, and then you have the Russians earlier this year coming down on so-called alleged Azeri kind of gangs, mafia type gangs in Russia. Not a lot has been said about what they're doing, but they're probably wondering who they're actually connected to and what their plans are, if there's some terrorism going on there and that kind of stuff. So they arrested them. One of them died in custody or something like that. It's vague in terms of what actually happened. And then the Azeris responded by arresting a bunch of Sputnik employees and other Russians, ethnic Russians in Azerbaijan, and treating them quite badly and all this kind of stuff. So
parading them in public, beating up,
yeah,
sending
exactly.
the message.
Right. I mean,
this is a message Moscow will understand.
Right. But
I've heard Zakharova say, as much as she was condemning Azeri smacking journalists in public, she suggested something like someone is trying to sour our relations, which we've cultivated with Azerbaijan for so long.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure, because because I mean, it's just control over that whole region. That those South Caucasus region is kind of, they're quite important. They're an extension of this whole Middle Eastern war because they border right in the north of
Muslim,
of Iran,
oil, and Russia, China together.
Right, exactly. So the West,
the Iranian media claimed that Azerbaijan was used to its airspace was used for Israeli jets to attack northern Iran.
Exactly.
Iran never officially complained about that, but their press kind of did it for them.
Mm-hmm. Which means that they would have had to flown through Turkey,
right?
And
that's
Armenia.
Why it's a secret.
Anyway,
but we now know they flew over Saudi Arabia.
Right, as well.
That shouldn't surprise. But still, the Saudi population, that's not officially like the House of Saud is on thinner and thinner ice, huh? Officially, you remember, don't be, their statement about Israel, don't be attacking our...
Yeah, so there's also shit going on there. And
what about the...
Yeah,
you want to say more on that?
No.
What about the big, beautiful bill? Over now to our MAGA correspondent.
It's beautiful. It's a big, beautiful bill. He signed it. There was bombers flying overhead. It was beautiful.
And it's not to be confused with Build Back Better. It's a different
totally different thing. Okay. Totally different thing. Yes. This one actually, I don't know. We'll see.
Tax cuts.
Well, yeah, that's
all about the tax cuts, man. Which just makes the national debt go.
Which has Musk on the warpath.
That guy just needs to shut up, sit down, and chill out.
Musk is your real savior. He's real MAGA, not Trump.
No, he's a real retard. He
really?
Is retarded. Yeah. So like he comes out, right, and he's got his he does a poll on Twitter as to whether or not he's going to do the...
Scotty's going to put it up here.
Oh, yeah? Let's take a look at this.
Musk yesterday. The way we're going to crack the uniparty system is by using a variant of how Epaminondas shattered the myth of Spartan invincibility at Leuctra. Extremely concentrated force at a precise location on the battlefield. Them's fighting words. Scroll up. That's the whole context. So that's his self-reply to, by a factor of 2-1, the poll you're talking about.
Yeah.
You wanted a new political party and you shall have it.
Who Who wanted this party?
Today, the America Party
Load
is
of people on
formed
Twitter.
to give you back your
They voted.
freedom.
Yeah,
Not
but
vote.
anyone could vote.
Yeah.
So I've got, I don't know how many fucking hundreds of thousands of retards from the rest of the world trying to tell America that they should have an America party. Like, no.
Yeah.
So I take it you're against this.
Yes,
America Party.
100%.
America's an empire, so everybody gets to vote. I'm sorry. That's
No.
what comes with empire. Yep. No,
Fuck
I'm
that.
sorry.
Fuck that.
Well, but they're
Alright.
from India.
Well,
They
then-
vote for the
Oh,
American
that's
Party.
the other thing.
Withdraw.
That's what I was going to get into was so he has a bunch of retards on Twitter. Hey, what do you want to do? Do you want me to create a new political party? And a bunch of Twitter retards are like, yeah, sure, that'd be great. And so now he's going to do it. And the big beautiful retard decides he's already filed his paperwork
Mhm.
to create it, right? And the treasurer of this party is an Indian.
No, he's not.
I'm like,
He's American.
no,
He's an American.
Ram-
Indian.
he's
Ramaswamy.
not American.
No, not Ramaswamy.
He's an American Indian.
It's the same shit as before with his H-1B stuff. He said he was going to die on the hill on the H-1B visa. Go ahead. Get out.
Get
Don't
out.
want you.
Do you want Trump to deport him?
I would not be sad.
Still, though, okay. Well, it could be a flash in the pan. He may not have anywhere near the supporting
No, yeah.
that exists out there. But that's fighting words.
Yeah, I know.
Battlefield, smash the uniparty system, new party.
It's delusional.
And I'm going to primary every last GOP member who approved this bill if it's the last thing I do on earth. That's what he was tweeting last week. That's pretty he's fucking committed. Or he's just larking.
I don't know. Hard to say. I think he's going to try something. I don't think it's going to be nearly as successful as he hopes. And
Do you just discount out of hand his essential point, which is that no, this increases the national debt. He seems to think that was a core pillar of MAGA, that we would not tax and spend more and more and more.
Yeah.
And now Trump's people are going around telling the press, no, that's based on the Congressional Budget Office projected, their projection.
yeah,
That by 10 years' time, the debt will have increased that much. It's not actually going to do that. But Musk is absolutely convinced, this does. This is the very opposite to
well, that's
what MAGA should be.
again the only thing that I shouldn't say again. From what I understand, you're correct. The number that everybody was throwing around about, and Musk himself was throwing those same numbers around, mind you, was the numbers that this other organization was saying was going to happen in 10 years' time, blah, 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 blah. It wasn't actually the thing that the bill was going to do. It didn't set that out as we are going to spend an extra blah, blah, an amount, an extra $2 trillion or whatever. That wasn't like in the bill. It was just the thing that came out and people like Musk were regurgitating. Even Thomas Massey was regurgitating it. So I'm
Do you
willing
think
to...
Massey has it wrong too?
Massey has a point. And one of Massey's points was like, look, this thing it's in the name. It's big.
Yeah.
So like, can we like break it into pieces and be like,
And actually get a chance to
because he
read
actually would have voted for like, more funding for the border and extending the tax cuts to, the majority of Americans. Like those are the things that he would want to sign off on. But there are other things in there that he wouldn't. And so that was why he was saying no, is because, well, you're lumping it all together and I don't want that.
He didn't want an omnibus bill.
So, I can understand that. At the same time,
It seems to me that it comes down to you've either got to put your trust and faith in our Lord and Savior, Donald Trumpus,
mhm.
and just You voted for him. You got to roll this. He trusts the plan, in a sense. Or if you go full libertarian on it, like where he's deluded for me is that you're going to physically challenge the system. That would be. I think you can. You can make a perfectly reasonable libertarian argument and say, no, this isn't going to end well. It really isn't going to end well. So you take the black pill of a doomer approach, but then you're not so invested. You're just like, well, this might work. The MAGAites might end up looking actually like a bunch of cult members who just put their full faith and trust in the Lord, their savior, Donald Trump.
Yeah.
For now, I'll just roll with it. I mean, but he actually wants a head-on collision fight. I mean, that's fighting where it's like there's going to be fireworks one way or the other. I don't think he'll actually have success challenging, but in the primaries, is it this year? This year, the midterms?
No, next year.
It's a whole year away.
Yeah, so it's I don't think he's going to have a whole lot of success with it. I think he's delusional, and I think he's high on ketamine again. and frankly, he should just shut up. Because just because you have like $50 billion doesn't mean shit. It doesn't mean you know how to run the world. Now, when you're advising on certain things, like, yeah, the whole Doge thing, that was great. It was fantastic. But he's shown...
But you see where he's coming from. He's like, we wanted to reduce wasteful spending.
Well, yeah.
And now there's a big porky pork bill.
Yeah, no, I get it.
And I haven't looked. I don't know which items are porky, but I think there's massive increase from military spending. What's the other big bonanza item? Big ticket. There's the tax cuts, and I'm seeing the usual left-right divide. Oh, it's tax cuts for the rich only.
Except it's not.
It doesn't seem like that.
No, there's
no tax on tips on overtime.
But those are limited. It's not like there's no tax on tips at all. It's like only up to 25K, or it only kicks in after 25K. I don't remember. But like it does extend the tax cuts that Trump already had put in place and were going to expire, so they needed to get renewed, which is what he's doing. Except this is now, I think, codified. And so it would be like permanent, I think.
That's right. Before there was a deal where it would expire this December. Yeah.
So it's not like the crazy lefties who wouldn't let a good thing be said about Trump if their life depended on it. There is some good stuff in there. Funding for the border and kicking out the illegals and all that stuff.
And then there's stuff like Massey was pointing out, free reign for all AI companies, and basically eminent domain for all AI corporations anywhere in the US.
Yeah.
Like, why the hell is that in there? Because big corporation.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, was it just him doing his wheeling and dealing? And it's like, if you want some good, you gotta get dirty. I mean, it's a cesspool. There's no way you're going to be able to do anything in DC and keep your hands clean,
unless you join the America First Party,
and which is where Elon Musk is absolutely delusional. Because if you try and go, you're like, we'll keep our hands 100% clean of everything, you will not get anything done. Like, you do not understand people fundamentally, let alone politics, if you think that it's going to work.
Yeah. Yeah, he's an autistic nerd. And his comparison with Sparta, I mean, that just shows you right there. It'll be just like that.
Yeah.
So did Trump halt U.S. arms shipments to Ukraine or not?
Sort of.
Every day I hear it's
yes,
and then it's no. No. The sneaky Germans, that they're plotting a workaround of buying US weapons to send to Ukraine, and Trump won't refuse that. He's like, okay, money, go for it. But there is a hint of what's coming though. BlackRock. There was a big fanfare last year that BlackRock would be contributing billions to some fund for rebuilding Ukraine. They've dropped that whole project. That's a sure sign of collapse.
They dropped it after Trump won.
Already?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why I saw it as news this week.
It's only coming out this week.
Ah. And yeah, well, Ukraine is another show for another show's topic, but Russia is now smacking Ukraine on a regular basis now. Ramping it up. Maybe that's why Trump's not happy, but he just has to say I'm not happy, but yeah. This extreme rainfall event in Texas, is it still ongoing? No, it came and went. Don't know why I thought. I think I saw that there's another buildup of somewhere else nearby. Anyway, it was nuts. They say AP's reporting today 51 dead confirmed, but 27 more girls from this summer camp are still missing. I don't think they're going to turn up alive. Mm-hmm. Extreme rainfall. Just insane. Did you guys see some of the... Let me play it here. Time-lapse footage of this river.
Yeah.
This is a short time-lapse of 50 minutes of the river going from like a few feet to 26 feet. It's not the only river in the region. That's partly why it was such a bad flood. The Llano River, but there are other rivers that converge in this place in central Texas. Probably the single worst place you'd want to have rain just sitting there and dumping 10 inches in a couple of hours.
Yeah, if you look at the time lapse on that, it really does the majority of the like rising of the floodwaters in like 2 minutes.
Yeah.
The majority, there's still a fair amount that comes after that, but it only took like 2 minutes for it to go from it's not a big deal to if you didn't already leave, you were dead.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's happening more and more. All over the place. Expect more. Expect worse. Global warming leads to increased precipitation because global warming oceans leads to increased evaporation, which leads to increased precipitation. There's probably more to it than that, obviously, but that's the basics of it. So you need global warming to eventually have global cooling, because if that increased evaporation, increased precipitation moves far enough north, it'll fall as snow, increasing the ice caps, and then you can have a glacial rebound. But you have to wait, and you have to suffer through the global warming.
Will me being vegetarian have any effect?
If you go vegetarian tomorrow, it would probably stop it all, yeah.
Really?
Yeah. But it's a big ask.
If I eat nothing but fava beans and hummus.
No, that'll create a lot of hot air. That'll create a lot of greenhouse gases. That would just make things worse.
Okay.
It's probably vegetarians that are contributing to greenhouse gases more than anything else. Them and the cows, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, yeah. Are we done?
Yeah.
Okay.
We're done. It's time.
I've got a pet termite.
What you call him?
Clint.
What?
Clint.
Clint.
Yeah. Clint eats wood.
Oh my God. Where do you get that? Are you going on jokes.com or do you
No, you just make it up, yeah.
Just make it up?
Yeah.
Pretty good. Maybe we should put them in a book.
Yeah. Definitely.
Joe's little joke book.
Joe's crap joke book. Anyway, so we're going to leave it this week, folks. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be back next week with another one. So until then, have a good one. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
See ya.
Can't stop the signal now.